Und we're back.
As I entered the building and looked around, I realized that the antibiotics I so desperately needed would be kept in the back of the shop, so I carefully made my way towards the counter. Just in front of it, I noticed a body wearing what appeared to be a white lab coat. It was probably the chemist. From the blood stain and bullet hole in his back, I surmised that he had been shot to death.
I don't know. I'm probably gonna regret this.
I hadn't survived the outbreak this long by taking unnecessary chances. I swung the crowbar at his head over and over again, until all that was left was a bloody red mush on the carpet. Not even the infected could survive that. As I walked into the back room, my heart sank. While the front of the shop had been left untouched, looters had clearly broken in at the back and taken all the medicine. Most likely, drug addicts in search of a fix. I searched everywhere, but the only thing left was a few tubes of hemorrhoid cream. I made my way back to the front of the shop and realized that my mission was far from over. I wondered if I could find any extra supplies before continuing.
First aid
I
kit.
realized that a place like this probably sold some basic first aid kits and equipment. It didn't take long to find what I was after. I put it in my backpack and then headed back outside. I pressed on towards the local mall. It was the only other place in town that I knew for sure had a pharmacy. There may have been other places, but I didn't know where they were, and didn't want to risk getting eaten alive while looking for something that might not exist. As the mall finally came into view, I felt a strange mix of relief and horror. I was now close to my goal, but it seemed that the last few hundred yards would pose an almost insurmountable problem. The plaza in front of the building was infested with zombies, idly wandering in circles and occasionally bumping into each other. As I wondered what to do next, the wind suddenly changed direction, carrying my scent toward the pack of infected.
Shit.
In near perfect unison, the infected sniffed the air and turned to stare directly at me. A split second later, they charged.
Ah, shit. Okay, no, no for the car. They will drag my ass out. I already went through that experience. Not gonna use my ammunition. Just try to run around the block.
I didn't stand a chance against the oncoming mob of post-human cannibals, so I turned on my heels and fled as quickly as I could. The infected were surprisingly fast on their feet, but luckily they struggled to avoid the mass of abandoned vehicles and debris that covered the road. I was able to lose most of them by running around the block, and those that still followed were quite a distance behind me.
Excellent.
As I returned to the plaza, I realized that not many of the zombies had chased me as I had originally thought. Unable to reach the main entrance, and with the infected now approaching from all sides, I had no choice but to run down a small side alley. There was still a single doorway into the mall, and luckily it was still unlocked. I slammed the door shut behind me. It seemed reasonably strong, and was small enough to prevent large numbers of infected from pushing against it all at once. Still, leaving it as it was definitely posed a risk. I closed the bolts on the door and then quickly looked around for something to barricade it. Luckily there was some old tables and chairs nearby, which I was easily able to wedge in front of the entrance. No one would be getting in or out this way anytime soon. Now that I was reasonably sure that the infected wouldn't be getting into the building the same way I did, my attention turned to my new surroundings. I was in a long hallway with several storage rooms on either side. From the vague odor of damp and chemicals, I realized this was obviously some kind of basement used primarily by the cleaning staff. I could see a stairwell leading up to the main building at the end of the hall.
Let's ensure the area is secure.
I carefully explored the various side rooms, making sure that none of the infected had made a home here. Fortunately, this part of the building was empty, but I soon realized that some of the rooms posed a serious problem for security. Several of the windows had been smashed in the chaos following the outbreak. Since I didn't have the time or resources to block up every one, I instead closed all the interior doors and wedged chairs under the handles.
Alright.
I climbed the flight of stairs to the ground floor and then headed through a small doorway into the main building. The mall was eerily quiet, and despite my best efforts to keep a low profile, every footstep seemed to echo throughout the entire building. The shutters on most stores had been closed, presumably in an attempt to keep the infected from roaming freely. Frequent bloodstains were an ever-present reminder of how little the shopkeepers had achieved. A sickening feeling in my gut told me this place had been the scene of a terrible massacre. As I slowly made my way to the central square, I recalled that the pharmacy was up on the second floor. I could see no signs of life, human or otherwise, and so decided to ascend the nearest escalator and secure the medicine the folks back at the farm so desperately needed. Before I could reach it, the silence was broken by a tremendous bang, swiftly followed by something whizzing an inch past my head. Someone had taken a shot at me. I immediately dove for the nearest pillar as several more bullets were fired. Amazingly, I wasn't hit. The pillar offered temporary respite from my assailants, but it would only be a matter of time before they outflanked me. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them maneuvering on the floor above. I had to act fast if I was to have any chance of survival.
Alright, I may regret this.
I realized that they had me totally pinned down, and that my chances of surviving a firefight were slim. My only hope was to try and convince them to let me live. I cried, "I'm not infected," as loud as I could. There was a pause, followed by a voice full of fear and doubt. "Prove it." He ordered me to put my gun on the ground and step slowly out from behind the pillar with my hands up. I could see no alternative, and so I reluctantly did what I was told. As I stood defenseless in the open, I explained that I hadn't been bitten, and that I meant them no harm. The survivors whispered among themselves for a moment, before one of them asked me to take off my clothes so they could see for themselves. I undressed, and a man armed with a shotgun came down to inspect me. Finally satisfied that I wasn't about to eat them, the man asked me why I was here. I decided it was best if I told the survivors the truth from the beginning. They'd probably find out sooner or later anyway. As I put my clothes back on and picked up my equipment, I explained all about the fortified farm, the disease that plagued my family, and my quest for antibiotics. They seemed impressed by my bravery and allowed me to join them on the second floor.
Yay!
As I climbed the escalator, I realized just how wise my decision to surrender had been. There were at least 20 survivors in the building, with over half of them armed with shotguns or rifles.
Nice.
The rest had an assortment of vicious-looking melee weapons. As soon as I reached the top, I was directed toward their leader, a tall and muscular African-American who introduced himself as Ox. Ox told me that if I wanted his help and protection, or at least to be allowed to roam his mall freely, I had to earn it. Apparently there was no longer any power in the mall, and he wanted someone to head down to the basement and turn on the generator. The last man he sent never came back.
Alright, gonna pause and cut here.